Welcome to the Express News You Pick'em show, brought to you by Affordable Debt Consolidation. I'm your host, Nick Talbot. I'm joined today by Texas beat writer Nick Moyle and UTSA beat writer Greg Luca. Lots of big things since the last time we talked. Good results for UTSA, mixed results for Texas. Let's start off with Texas. They had a huge game this past weekend with TCU. What have we learned about them and their quarterback situation? Awful young quarterbacks kind of struggling at the moment.
Well, I think one of the main lessons that we've learned is the one that we probably should have learned in the past, is that Texas is really good at fooling people into thinking they're really good, when in fact they are not. They're right there. They're on the cusp, and we've seen that this year in games against Alabama. They had the big win against Kansas State a couple weeks ago to put them in contention for a Big 12 championship berth. And then they go and they host TCU, who's obviously having an incredible first season. They just fall flat. And the big issue in that game was the defense played phenomenal. They held the Big 12's highest scoring offense, the number one leader in total offense, to just 17 points. Really stymied them the whole game. The issue was they could not get anything going on offense. Quinn Ewers, for the third straight game, really struggled. Over his past three contests, he's just completing 45% of his passes. He has as many touchdowns, interceptions. He has really struggled with the deep ball, which is one of the big things that scouts loved about him coming out of high school. Is he has a huge arm and he was pretty accurate with it. We have not seen that over the past 3 weeks. And I think the main issue in that game was Sarkisian kept dialing up those deep balls, the go routes, the post routes. Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson only touched the ball 6 times in the second half, which is kind of insane. It's almost coaching malpractice, especially when you have a guy like Bijan coming off a 200-yard rushing performance, the most electric player probably in college sports right now. And for him to only touch the ball 5 times, Roschon had 1 carry, Bijan had 5. They combined for 4 total yards. It just, that's the story of the game right there, because the defense made more than enough plays to win that game. And now Texas going into their stretch run, they have to win at Kansas this week, and they have to win against Baylor next week just to have a chance at making it in the Big 12 championship game. They need Kansas State to lose at least one of their final 2, and they need Oklahoma State to lose one of their final 2. So destany's out of their hands right now. But I think more importantly, especially after coming off last year's 5-7 finish, they really need to close strong here, especially with, Arch Manning was in attendance for that TCU game. A lot of major recruits were in attendance for that game. I can't imagine it left a great impression on them. So closing strong, regardless of whether they can get into a Big 12 championship game or not, is going to be really paramount for Sarkisian's program going forward, especially from a recruiting standpoint.
Might have looked good for Arch Manning. He probably looked at it and said, hey, maybe I can beat this guy out.
I would think so. It did not look pretty out there. And again, look, Quinn, he sat out his senior year, or didn't sit out. He skipped his senior year of high school. He was at Ohio State last year. He enrolled in August, missed a couple weeks because of COVID. So he's a little bit behind. And I think people expected him to come in and just really take the reins. And, after what we saw in that first quarter against Alabama, everybody was kind of ready to anoint him. And we've seen, look, he's 19 years old. This should be his first year of college football. There's going to be growing pains. And I don't think Sarkisian's made it easy on him. But we'll see moving forward, because he's going to be the guy. They're sticking with him, even though they have Hudson Card back there in the wings, and he's proven that, he can lead this team to some wins and, play effective football. But it's Quinn's team now, and I think they hope it could be Quinn's teams next year. But we'll see.
Yeah, that game probably made a lot of armchair offensive coordinators out of it, from people just yelling at their television, where is Bijan? Just hand the ball off.
And that's the thing, too. Bijan didn't even have a single target in the game. He's incredible in the screen game. So for him to not even get, a touch in the passing game was kind of insane. But again, it was a weird strategy from Sark, and, he kind of put some of the blame on himself. But we've seen that in the past. So, we'll see moving forward if he really commits to the run game like he did against Kansas State.
Greg, on the flip side of that, pretty much all positives from UTSA lately. Was that 51-7 on Louisiana Tech? It was over by the first quarter, pretty much, and they just ran right over them.
Yeah, and what's remarkable about it, the run that they're on right now, is that it's all positives on the field, but there's still a lot of different concerns and negative things that pop up through the week, especially with the amount of injuries that they have, which Jeff Traylor was saying just this morning is kind of the storyline for the season. To lose your top wide receiver in DeCorian Clark, to lose the preseason defensive player of the year in Rashad Wisdom, your 2 starting offensive tackles, Demetrius Allen and Mekhi Hart, and then Brandon Matterson, your top defensive tackle. For them to still go through all of that and be able to come out as strong as they have and be able to pick up wins in all of these games has been nothing short of remarkable, I think. And obviously the league is still pretty weak, and that's why they're able to run over some of these teams. But the way they've been able to adapt and come through with different styles, early in the year, they had to resort to this quick passing game because the offensive line wasn't holding up. And now, especially with the emergence of redshirt freshman running back Kavorian Barnes, they can just line up and play power football and kind of run over people a little bit and have a whole different sort of dynamic to their offense from what we've seen before. So at this point, the target for them is to complete an undefeated run through Conference USA, which would be a first. Remember last year, obviously they went 11-0 to start and then had the collapse against North Texas in the final game of the regular season. So now they're heading to Rice this weekend, where they'll be about a 17-point favorite, it looks like, and then they'll host UTEP, and that could be 20-point plus in their favor. And so they're most likely to do that, and that will set them up for probably a rematch against North Texas in the Conference USA championship game. They could also play Western Kentucky or Florida Atlantic, depending how it shakes out. But there should be a Conference USA title game back here in the Alamo Dome. So things are looking up, certainly, for the program, trending in the right direction. And that'll be the next significant test for them in all likelihood.
And what does that kind of mean for the program going forward? I mean, Jeff Traylor's always, it's hot seat time of the year for a lot of college football coaches. A lot of these guys are going to be chasing Jeff Traylor. What do you think this success means for the program? What do they have to do to keep kind of turning this through and, of course, keep Jeff Traylor interested versus going to somewhere like Texas Tech, which was really kind of wanted that guy last year?
Yeah, it seems like having him under that 10-year contract would answer a lot of questions, but we knew even as soon as he signed it that if somebody ponied up enough money, it could become a topic of conversation real quick. And, with some of these openings that we see across college football, it's something that's in the back of people's minds around here, and that people are keeping an eye on the rumor mill. And you might see his name floated for an opening here or there, but what seems most likely is that it would have to be a Texas job that he would be motivated to want to take, and that would come open. And I don't know, in all honesty, if he would be ready to get a look at one of the big ones like a UT or a Texas A&M if in the next few years that became a talking point, which is a whole other can of worms to open up. But I think for the time being, it's all about sort of developing the infrastructure here and continuing to make sure that this program can be at the level that they want it to reach, especially as they get ready to jump to the American Athletic Conference next summer. So it's about expanding staffing. It's about curating NIL opportunities that can help bring in the top talent that they need and things like that are a little bit under the surface that people might not see beyond the obvious that they do week to week, which is to just have this team seemingly ready to perform at a pretty high level on the field, regardless of whatever injuries or lineup shuffles that they seem to be going through. You know
who UTSA fans really have to thank right now? The people who gave Jimbo Fisher a 10-year guaranteed $95 million contract.
Listen, they got a lot of money over there. You never know.
They do have a lot of money over there. That's a lot of money. 3-7, Texas A&M really struggling, though. We'll touch on base maybe that a little bit more. But obviously, they lost to Florida. They lost to Auburn. Man, not a good time. As much as Texas has been up and down, A&M has really been struggling more than anything else, especially with quarterback play. So what does Texas have? We were kind of talking what Texas has to do kind of going forward, what UTSA has to do going forward for their individual goals here. Texas still wants to win that Big 12 title. Where does the program go forward, if they can get on that roll, Moyle? Everything always wants Texas is back, but it's still not back, obviously. And they keep hurting me in these picks, which, by the way, go to expressnews.com, you pick them and see if you can beat Nick Moyle and Greg. Well, not Nick Moyle or Nick Talbot. You're probably going to have to beat Greg Luca, who's still among the leaderboards here on our you pick them. I keep going with big problem for me, and I know it hurt Luca last week too, is I keep going with this thing called the SP Plus on ESPN. They love Texas. They keep hooking me in because it's like, what you should use if you're betting on games or whatever, because it is point spreads and all this, and they love Texas, and they're killing me.
It's not the metric's fault. We have to take some of the blame for this.
If the metric has Texas ranked 8th, it's the metric's fault.
The metric is dead to me. I think if I look at I love analytics. But back in the day, we had our little Spurs Nation program, and I had the Numbers by Nick segment. I'm a big numbers guy. I love them, but I can't, in all good conscience, look at Texas being the number 8 team in the nation right now and say that's spot on. That's legit. There's a lot of metrics that prove Texas is a good team, and I don't think they're a bad team. They're obviously, this isn't the same Bama that we've seen in recent years, but they were right there with Bama. The loss to Texas Tech in Lubbock was inexcusable, even with Hudson Card at quarterback. And then, you lose the Oklahoma State game and last week the TCU. But yeah, I think a lot of people got really high on Texas after that Kansas State game. But they were bad in the second half of that game offensively. For the second straight game, they just scored 3 points in the second half. And that's kind of been the running theme in Sark's tenure, is either Texas builds a halftime lead and they fall flat in the second half. It doesn't seem like they're making the proper adjustments. While the other teams are. Either that or the other teams are sticking with their game plan and sticking to their guns, kind of like what TCU did, where they just stuck to the run game and they knew that eventually something was going to break, and they did get that 75-yard run in the second half, because eventually Texas' defense, as good as they played, they're on the field for 37 minutes. They're on the field for almost 20 more plays. So that, that wears you down. You could be having a great game, but eventually, some guys are going to break. So I think going forward, and kind of like Greg, mentioned before with UTSA, Texas really wants to take some sort of momentum into the SEC, which is a move that's coming in a couple years. Right now, they don't have that. I mean, Sarkisian's 11-11 through his first 22 games at Texas. You look back, Tom Herman was 13-9. Charlie Strong was 10-12. Mac Brown was 17-5. John Makovic was 11-10-1. So, Sark hasn't really done a lot to distinguish himself. Tom Herman in that second year, he was 13-9 through 22 games, which is fine, but they ended up going to the Sugar Bowl, winning. And then obviously you had Sam Ellinger on the stage saying Texas is back. And we all knew that, Texas is not back. And also, hey, shouts to Sam for, getting a starting job in Indy and then kind of losing it, and the whole Jeff Saturday chaos out there. And also Cameron Dicker might be the best kicker in the NFL right now. So shouts to him too. Guy just makes game winning kicks.
Colt McCoy picked up a win too this week.
And honestly, Colt McCoy has the best job in sports. I swear he's just been a backup for a dozen years. He comes in, he plays like 1 or 2 games a year, always looks pretty good. Nobody expects much, but I think he has a pretty good win-loss record. So it's like, man, kids, if you could be Colt McCoy, because he's a legend here, never has to buy anything in Austin, has had a great year, has got a great contract. I mean, Colt McCoy, he doesn't get banged up. I would love to be Colt McCoy. That's my dream job when I grow up. Like, dang.
Play 2 games every year, right? And look good doing it usually.
It's perfect. But yeah, I mean, for Texas looking forward, look, they have to beat Kansas and they have to beat Baylor. They're better than both of those teams. They have to prove it. Now, is Kansas State and Oklahoma State going to lose one game to help Texas out? They don't know that. Who knows? But they can't worry about that. They have to close this strong. They have to hold on to Arch Manning. They have to hold on to recruits, and they have to make it to a decent bowl game. Maybe they'll be back in the Alamo Bowl because they always want to take Texas. And they need to take some sort of momentum into next year, because you're going to be on the cusp of going into the SEC. And if you're not going to cut it in the Big 12 with the talent that you have and the coaches that you have, then you're maybe thinking about making a coaching change heading into a new conference. And I don't think that's the sort of turmoil Texas wants to deal with. So these 2 games are going to be really huge, just for how they close out. And for, I think, Sarkisian, his seat's not hot right now, but it could get a little toasty depending on how these 2 games go.
All right. And Greg, we talked about making adjustments a little bit with Texas there. That's one thing that UTSA has done pretty well. You said all they have these injuries, but how are they adjusting to manage all that? I mean, they have a terrible pass defense now that Wisdom's gone, but they still win. How is this guy doing all this?
Yeah, I think the most interesting adjustments have been on the offensive side, because when you lose your number 1 wide receiver, it has the potential to reshuffle a lot of the way you do things. And we saw in this game against Louisiana Tech, they started with 2 tight ends, but they really did end up playing a lot of the 3 wide receiver sets we've seen all year with Joshua Cephas and Zachary Franklin. And they plugged in Tyke Ogle-Kellogg, who is a really interesting player in that he's been around the program for many years now. He's a redshirt senior, and I think this is his extra year as well. And every season, at some point or another, I'm either writing or asking about his potential, because he was a highly recruited player and has a lot of obviously physical gifts at 6'5", and the athleticism that he brings and the speed and just a lot of the things that he shows in his best moments. But Jeff Traylor and Frank Wilson before him have talked about a lot of the off the field stuff with Tyke, whether it's just maturity issues, being on time, handling everything you have to handle in the meeting rooms and in class and things like that. And it's kept him from carving out a bigger role. And now, whether those things have come along or not, they need him. So it's going to be interesting to see how well he holds up both on the field and that other end of the bargain too. But so far, so good. The first game, he only had 3 catches and there was 1 pretty significant drop. I mean, obviously it wasn't costly given that they won the game going away, but it would be interesting to see how his role changes going forward. And everywhere else has just been figuring it out. We talked about the offensive line on the last show, but to lose as many as 5 tackles at different points in the season. At one point, they were starting a converted defensive tackle at left tackle and a walk-on at right tackle, and just doing what they have to do to get through the game and sort of scheme around relying on those guys to hold up blocking for downfield passing. And defensive line, it's just a next man up thing, as cliche as that is. And at safety, they were fortunate that they had another one of their experienced veteran leaders back there in Kelechi Nwachukwu, who is a single-digit guy for them, voted by his teammates as one of the leaders on the team, even though he was in a backup role. He's the only guy you can say that about, that he wasn't an every week starter, but they were still somebody he was considered as one of those central figures on the team. So they've had options at each turn to try to plug somebody in. And I guess it speaks to the depth and the quality of the roster that they've built, that they can just continue to do that and hold up against some of these teams in Conference USA. And I think that part, I don't want to run down their accomplishments at all, but that can't be understated either. It's just that the league is not very strong. So a lot of these teams that they go up against just don't have the talent to compete with them. And having 4 or 5 standouts is enough, even if another 3 or 4 are on the shelf.
All right. Well, talk about talent of the league. They will have a little bit higher talent next year. They take a lot of these Conference USA teams with them, but they're taking some of the better ones. How are they going to adjust for the American? You talk about this talent gap that they have, but that's going to be matched very quickly.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think this is a lot of stuff that we want to dive into over the offseason. It's just how does everything match up from a budget perspective, a coaching salary perspective, a resource perspective, the football staff. And I think we're going to find that there's a little bit of a disparity. And right now, the fans around here are conditioned to expect that because UTSA has had a couple of good years, that that's just the new standard and that's how it is. But I mentioned this on one of our previous shows as well. But just because they won some games 2 years in a row doesn't mean that they should be doing that that's the expectation. I think maybe it's been understated somehow just how surprising this is or how unlikely it is that they've risen as quickly as they have. And so if there's some regression or if they're 6-6 next year, people might react like it's the end of the world or some great downfall, but it would be a product of how tough of a schedule they play. I mean, you're at Tennessee as part of your non-conference schedule. There's not a lot of easy matchups in there. And then you go into the league that's going to be a lot tougher than what they've faced previously. So if people want that expectation to rise, I think everything else around the program has to rise too, is the point that I would make.
They got to face the stronger UT. But don't bump.
You see what you did there.
The other UT really turned it around much faster than the UT out of Texas, didn't they?
It'll be interesting to see how they handle that transition. I think on the strength, it depends who comes back. If Frank Harris is back for another year, and if some of the receivers are back for another year, the silver lining with some of these injuries we've seen is the guys I mentioned, Wisdom included, but also Matterson at defensive line and the 2 offensive tackles, Hart and Allen, and then DeCorian Clark most likely as well, are all probably going to be back for another year as a result of their injuries, where maybe they would have been out of eligibility, or they would have, in Clark's case, probably chosen to pursue the NFL. He might have gotten like an early to mid-round grade. And so now you have some more ammo to head into that league with from a talent perspective. And we've certainly seen that this coaching staff is capable of drawing up winning game plans week after week. So for the time being, you would think that they're going to be able to be competitive in that league and maybe even, finish in the top half or have a chance to be in the mix for a title. But that's a long way off. And I think a lot of it depends on what happens to all those other programs and what kind of trajectories they're on too. But long term, I think there's still some work that needs to be done around here for UTSA to feel like consistently they should be at that level year after year.
Well, talking about being at a consistent level, that's Greg Luca when he's making his picks. Once again, everyone go to expressnews.com/youpick'em. Make your picks. See if you can match Greg Luca in his consistency. I'm not that far back at the moment, but I'm trying here.
That was a smooth segue. I like that. That's good.
You like that? Well, sometimes I just get things to work here. It's a lot. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
The thing is, I'm the lead of the writer and editor group, but there's 40, random civilians out there who are ahead of me too. So we're not doing that great as a staff, to be honest with you. I've lost too many on Texas and Texas A&M lately.
Exposed right now. It's not great.
Hey, some of those picks were hard. I mean, the Vikings Bills game, we're throwing out. We got to pick some NFL games out there. We're picking the tough games. So props to the pickers out there who are beating us, because some of these games are tough to pick. Whether it's Washington and Oregon, which came down to 3 points. Bills, Vikings came down to 3 points. Whether or not you believe S&P Plus thought that Texas was actually good, not going to buy that argument anymore. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, well, you know what? Last week, out of 388 people in this game, the highest score was 8 out of 10. Nobody got 9 and nobody was perfect. So that tells you a little bit about how crazy last week was.
It was crazy week. And hopefully everyone's week will be less crazy this week. And thanks for joining us. May your weeks be very safe and sound and less crazy than the Bills-Vikings game with 18,000 things down to the wire. And thanks for Nick Moyle and Greg Luca for joining me today. I'm Nick Talbot, Sports Editor, Express News.